Chapter 29. Harding. The smell of moss and mildew made Jack feel like he was a mile below the earth. This sensation was aided by the stones that made up the dungeon walls, and the torture devices and swinging chains that belonged in a morbid painting of the afterlife. Peter Claythorne had said these devices were here only for historical purposes, not to be used. But then, what rules applied anymore, now that Greenridge was in charge, now that Lady Claythorne was dead? And Claythorne was definitely dead, that much he did know. Greenridge had fired that green flare into the sky, as the horned creature had ordered. Somehow, in all of the chaos and madness of the day, this one fact scared him the most. Claythorne had not been friendly, nor altogether likable, but from the moment she'd limped onto the landing pad, authoritative and sure, she had been a foundation. She was what held this place together. With her gone, with Greenridge now in control, the fort would be as anarchical as its tangled maze of halls. A madhouse. Harding, who lay heaped in the corner into which he'd been thrown, let out a groan of pain. "Shut up in there!" an ape guard barked, slamming the butt of his rifle against the prison bars. Jack turned to look at Harding. He didn't look good. When the guards had brought them down here, they had left Jack mostly alone. They'd jostled him and dragged him through the maze halls, but they'd left him unharmed. Not Harding. They'd used him as a living punching bag. "He's hurt!" Jack said to the back of the guard's head. "He needs help!" The guard adjusted his grip on his rifle, the only sign that he'd heard Jack at all. "Jack!" came a voice to his left. Jack turned to see Mr. Bear peering at him from between the bars dividing this cell from the next. "Jack, thank goodness! I thought—" "Mr. Bear!" Jack said in surprise, running to the bars. He hissed sympathetically when he got a closer look at the old dog. There was a gash along his muzzle, still damp with blood, and one of his eyes had swollen almost completely shut. "Mr. Bear, what happened? Where are the others?"
"The others?" Bear asked, confused. "Vanguard left, and—"
"Vanguard left?" Jack asked. Bear nodded.
"The coup was well executed. Greenridge returned, battered up pretty bad, and fed us this story about the Ferrells wanting blood. He got Conway all worked up, wanting to go to war. It's brilliant, really. Get Conway and his team ready for a fight when Claythorne wants peace." They argued for a bit, but of course Claythorne was in charge. She sent them packing, just like she said she would. The annex wasn't even out of sight yet. Greenridge came up behind Claythorne and... He made a gun gesture with his finger and thumb. Pop, right in the back. Coward. He shook his head in disgust. There were a few loyalists, but they were outnumbered. The ones he kept alive... He gestured around the room. Looking around, Jack saw that several cells across from them were occupied. "Must need them or something," Bear reasoned, then paused. "It just doesn't make sense. Animal Control will find out what's happened. This isn't something they can hide. At most, there are 50 of them. They can't hold the fort forever. Not against Animal Control." "Maybe they don't have to," Jack said. "What do you mean?" "Maybe they don't plan to hold the fort." He met Bear's visible eye. "What is Safehaven?" "It's a defense," Bear said, "against Kirtian invasion." "Exactly. A plug," he said, remembering Peter Claythorne's words, "positioned at the end of the axe wound." "Which is the only way for a Kirtian army to enter Nicatia," Bear said, nodding. "Right," Jack said. "So what if he didn't want to hold the fort? What if he wanted to uncork the bottle?" "Kirtia," Bear responded, comprehending. "Yeah," Jack said. It made perfect sense. Animal Control would come, but that would take hours, maybe days. By that time, an army could leak in. Start small. And recruit. "When we came back," Jack started again, "Greenridge fired a green flare into the air to announce that Lady Claythorne was dead. But I think it was more than that. I think it was a signal to tell the Red Teeth the time has come." "Whoa, hold on," Bear said, standing upright.
The Red Teeth. The Red Teeth have been extinct for 40 years. King himself saw to it." "I know," Jack said, "but the skull-headed creature definitely said the Red Teeth." "Skull-headed creature," Bear said. He was watching Jack with concern. "Maybe you should rest." "I don't need to rest," Jack said, flinging out his arms in frustration, forgetting to keep his voice down. "I said quiet in there!" the guard barked once more. Jack approached Bear again. "Look, we followed Greenridge this morning. He went into the woods. He met with this skull-headed creature." The word puppet came to him again. "And the creature told him that the Red Teeth were ready at the gate. Ask Willie, ask Sprint, they were there. They'll tell you." He looked around the dungeon, trying to spy out the other apprentices. "Willie and Sprint," Bear said, confused. "Jack, I thought you... Oh, Jack, I thought you already knew." There was dead silence between them. Jack could feel his pulse rising, and a small ringing started in his left ear. "Know what?" he heard himself asking, clenching his teeth in the infinite silence that seemed to follow. "I'm sorry, Jack," Bear said, as he looked slowly up at him. "Your team, they didn't make it." The ringing was now in both ears, as though an explosion had gone off right by his head. Without knowing he was doing it, Jack sank to the stone floor, clutching the bars that separated him from Bear. "It's my fault," Bear said in a flat tone. "I shouldn't have got you involved. Apprentices are supposed to start on easy assignments." Bear continued to speak, but Jack could barely hear him. A flood of images were washing through his mind. Sprint ordering the menu up after beating Jack at cards. Hoover's eyes lighting up as they stood between the skyscrapers of Trearch. Willie swatting disgustedly at his own tongue after rescuing Jack. But mostly, he thought of the angry glare Maddie had given him when he'd explained to her she would be kicked out with the rest of them, whether or not she came along to follow Greenridge. "No," he said. "It's my fault. This was an easy assignment. Too easy. I talked the others into going out this morning because..." He tried to steel himself, to say the words. Conway had snapped at him, making him feel small and unimportant. But no matter how that had made him feel, no matter how suspicious Greenridge had acted, Jack hadn't followed the grizzly to prove anything. The truth was much simpler. "Because I was bored." Bear watched him, not seeming to know what to say. There was silence for a long while. Jack felt, more than ever, that he was buried under the earth. The weasel tow truck driver. What had Harding called him? Pooch. He had warned Jack about Harding, or at least he'd started to. "Folks around him tend to get..." To get what? Hurt? Killed? From where Jack was sitting, he himself seemed like the real danger. First Dr. Walraven, and now his only friends. But Dr. Walraven hadn't been first at all. There was also King of Hearts, the indestructible, seemingly immortal hero who had rid the world of the Red Teeth was dead because of Jack. Now the Red Teeth were back, and who was left to stop them? "I've been thinking about it," Bear said, breaking the silence. "There's something strange about this whole thing. The mutiny, I mean. It's like everything worked in Greenridge's favor. Claythorne sending Vanguard home, you and your ragged friend returning too late to tell anyone what had happened. By all accounts, his plan should have failed, but it seems to be going perfectly." He paused in thought. "Maybe he's part rabbit," he added with a weak grin. Then Bear's eyes shot past Jack, fixing on something behind him. Jack turned. Harding, who had looked like little more than a pile of dirty rags heaped in the corner, was standing. He rubbed his head, as if recovering from a massive headache, and turned around. He made no acknowledgement of Jack, Bear, or their surroundings. He simply walked to the bars where the guard stood. In response, the guard took a hesitant step away. "Stay back, you!" he ordered. "Water," the the lion said. His voice sounded more gravelly than usual.
"I said get back!"
the guard barked, clutching at his rifle, his eyes flicking between Harding and the stairwell.
"I need water,"
Harding repeated. He raised a trembling paw as if begging for a scrap. The guard relaxed a bit, lowering his rifle.
"You want some water, huh?"
he said. He reached for his hip flask, uncapped it, and took a swig.
"Here you go,"
he gargled, then spat the mouthful at Harding. But the water never hit him. It hung in midair, 1,000 crystal beads dangling from invisible strings, and then the beads came together. For half a second, the crystal blob of water simply levitated, reflecting the dim torchlight of the dungeon. And then it shot back at the guard. It burst against his face like a water balloon, but the water stayed there, wrapped around his muzzle, a crystal-clear mask that covered his mouth and nostrils. Immediately the guard dropped his rifle, swatting at his own face with both paws. He stumbled back against the bars of the opposite cell, letting out a scream that bubbled its way through the water. "Drop the keys!" Harding said, but the guard didn't seem to hear him. His eyes worked maniacally, back and forth, then snapped suddenly to the stairs. He made to run for them. But his steps became shallow, and eventually he collapsed, first to his knees, then his face. Jack stared through the bars. "You can control water," he said. "You killed him with water."
"He's not dead,"
Harding said. He seemed fatigued, leaning against the bars to look out at the collapsed guard.
"Well, we're not in a worse situation than we were,"
Bear said, "but we'll never get the keys now." But Harding was focusing on the limp body. He gripped the bars of the cell, staring at the fallen guard as if trying to see through him. By now, the other prisoners were standing at the bars of their own cells, watching with interest. The guard's leg shifted suddenly sideways.
"What exactly are you trying to—"
said a gray cat in the cell opposite them, but Bear waved him down. They watched in silence. For a moment, the guard didn't make any other movements. But then the leg shifted again. This time, the boot raised up off the ground. It pointed toward Harding and began moving through the air as though being pulled by an invisible paw. The guard slid along the stone floor, face down, dragging behind the elevated foot. He passed close to Bear's cell. The dog stooped, reaching through the bars and snatching the key ring from the guard's belt.
"Got it,"
he said. Harding let out a sigh, relaxing his shoulders. In response, the guard's foot dropped to the floor with a thud.
"Someone's coming,"
said the gray cat. Bear flicked through the keys. He jammed one into the lock. It didn't work. Jack could hear the footsteps now, coming from the stairs. Bear tried another key. Wrong. He swore as he fumbled the ring. The keys clattered to the stone. Jack, who was the nearest, reached through the bars and picked them up, his fingers pinching around a small black key. He passed it to Bear, who immediately stuffed it into the hole. It worked. Bear pushed the door open, slipped out, then clicked it gently shut once more. He stooped, grabbed up the rifle the guard had dropped, then bolted for the stairwell.
"What in the sharp-toothed world? Hey, you can't leave us here!"
the gray cat yelled after him. The other prisoners cursed and swiped at him as he passed, but he paid them no attention. Instead of leaving, however, he came to a stop just to the side of the opening, pressing his back to the wall and inclining his ear toward the stairs. The other prisoners continued to bark threats at him. A voice yelled out from the stairwell, an approaching guard.
"Fadden, you useless undertale! Keep them quiet down there!"
The guard came stumping into the room. Bear flung out a leg, sending the guard sprawling, then fixed the rifle on him.
"Keep your head shut if you don't want it open," he growled.
They made it to the rooftop, 8 of them in total. It was snowing in full force now, and the sky was a dense black. Harding had an arm draped over Bear's shoulder, limping heavily on his left leg.
"The annex pad,"
the gray cat said, pointing ahead of them.
"Can you fly?"
Bear asked.
"Of course I can," the cat said. "That's why they kept me alive."
By the same miracle that had kept the halls more or less free of guards, the rooftop seemed to be clear. But as they reached the annex, a voice called out.
"Hey, hold it!"
Jack spun around. A guard was yelling something into his shoulder-mounted radio. He pointed his rifle at them and let out a spray of bullets, which sparked against the cement roof and the body of the vehicle. Bear heaved Harding's weight into the annex, then spun around. He raised his rifle and returned fire. "Get in, Jack! Ow!" he cried out in pain as he took a hit to the shoulder. "Mr. Bear!" Jack yelled, but was pushed bodily into the annex. The cat climbed in after him, slamming the bay door shut just as more gunfire pinged against the window. "Wait!" Jack cried, reaching for the door. "We can't leave Mr. Bear!" Harding gripped his shoulder with surprising strength and shoved him into the smallest of the seats. "He's gone, Jack," he said. The gray cat crawled from the bay to the cockpit, and the Safehaven anisopters, the two were not divided. And within seconds, the annex wings began to pump up and down. Snow started to curl upward, then swirl wildly around the body of the machine. There was more gunfire, now pinging against both sides. As the annex rose and tilted sideways, Jack saw Mr. Bear surrounded by soldiers. Several raised their weapons and fired at the annex. "Don't worry," the cat yelled from the cockpit. "This thing's meant to take a lot more than bullets. It's the SAMs we gotta worry about." "SAMs?" Jack asked, fumbling his safety restraints with trembling paws. "Surface-to-air missiles," the cat yelled. "Safehaven's the first defense up here, so you can imagine we're very well armed." The annex lifted up into the air. Jack shut his eyes and gripped the sides of his seat. "Then let's get out of here," Harding said. "Treyarch as quick as you can." "That's the plan," the cat agreed. The body of the annex leaned forward, and they cut through the snowy air. "At this point, it's just a matter of... Uh-oh." Jack opened his eyes. The cat was looking at a circular screen on the console. "We've got company." Out the left window, a bright light was moving toward them, moving much too quickly. "Is it a missile?" Jack yelled, hearing the panic in his own voice. "It's an annex," the cat said, his paws working across the console, flipping switches, turning dials. "And there's another one." Sure enough, a second light was approaching from the other side. "They've got us pinned," the cat yelled. "Sorry, boys, Treyarch will have to wait. First step is survival." The annex banked hard to the right. They flew past the second light, narrowly missing it. Out the window, Jack now saw the peak of the tallest mountain. They were moving north, toward the axe wound. There was a loud shrieking sound. It whistled past the window to the left, a flickering light that left an unmistakable trail of smoke behind it. A missile. "Don't worry," the cat called back. "I've still got a few moves." But just as he said this, there was an explosion of noise, a heavy jolt, and brightest orange lit up the interior of the craft. Jack felt heat licking his face. When he opened his eyes, he looked out into open sky. The cockpit was a gaping hole on the face of the machine. The pilot was gone. As the anisopter began spinning out of control, someone pounced on top of him. Harding unclasped Jack's harness. There was an immediate sensation of weightlessness. They were in a free fall. Pulling him into a one-armed hug, the lion used his free arm to move himself along the floor of the falling craft, then planted both feet against the remains of the cockpit and leapt into the roaring wind.